Hi everybody, my name is Ollie. I'm a junior doctor living and working in England, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to be talking about locuming. It's one of those words that doesn't really make sense until you specifically ask somebody what it means. Most commonly I've come across the term in the past when my friends and family members have gone to see their GP, their general practitioner, and they say that my normal GP, the normal doctor I see, was busy, so instead I saw a locum doctor. Is this a proper doctor? Is this somebody else? Is this another GP? Who are they? The other way you might hear about it is if you have friends or family that are doctors saying that they're going to do a locum shift or they're going to be locuming this weekend. So in this video we're going to talk about what exactly locuming is, why when you are a doctor you might be interested in doing it, and then some of the wider context in which locuming exists within the NHS. I think the best place to start, as usual, is to define our terms and go through what we mean. So the word locum comes from the Latin phrase locum tenens, which means someone who holds a place, essentially. And what this historically meant is someone of an equal stature and profession, so you might think about soldiers, clergymen, doctors, and so on. To give an example in practice, let's say that you're not feeling very well and you ring your local GP surgery and you get an appointment that day. And your local GP practice normally employs 3 full-time general practitioners who will each do a clinic in the morning and the afternoon. So you've got 3 doctors that are there all day seeing patients. Let's say, however, that one of those GPs, for whatever reason, is unable to make it into work. So maybe they are sick themselves, or they get into a car accident on their way to work in the morning so they can't do the clinic, or maybe their child is sick, has to come home from school, and the GP has to go home and look after them. That leaves an empty slot in the clinic. There's no doctor, so that clinic can't go ahead. Those patients can't be seen. With enough notice, if they know that that slot is going to be empty, what that GP practice can do is employ a locum GP to fill in that position, to hold the place of the GP that is absent, which makes sure that that clinic can go ahead and those patients are still seen. And this is important for 2 reasons. Obviously, if you've got sick patients, we need to make sure that they get seen as quickly as possible. And secondly, the GP practice will have health targets to hit within their own area. They'll have to see so many patients, manage the conditions of so many patients, and so on. So making sure that those clinics go ahead is really important for both the patients and the GP practice. I think this then begs the question as to why another doctor would suddenly volunteer to come and appear on very short notice, and the answer when it comes to locuming is money. And so locum shifts, in exchange for usually being organised on quite short notice and maybe putting someone outside of their comfort zone, that is somewhere where they don't normally work or don't know the team very well, they tend to come in exchange for a premium salary. So let's give you an example of how this might work. I'm currently working as an FY1, a Foundation Year 1 doctor in the NHS, which is the sort of most newly qualified, most junior grade of doctor that you can be. My standard salary is £13.81 per hour on average. I'm contracted for 48 hours a week, and pretty much regardless of exactly what it is that I'm doing, what type of patients I'm seeing, where I'm working, I'm earning the same rate regardless. But let's say that I'm off sick on a given day and they still need another doctor to help man the ward. A locum FY1, at least in the area where I work, is paid about £45 per hour for exactly the same role. It's just to make sure that services can still go ahead. At £45 per hour, that is more than 3 times my normal wage for exactly the same job if I do it as a locum. In a year's time, when I become an FY2 or a senior house officer, an SHO, that rate will go up to £55 an hour in my region. A consultant, if they were so inclined, somebody who has finished their training, could easily make upwards of £80 an hour, again for doing exactly the same job that they would normally do during the day, just if it's done as a locum, it comes with that premium pay package. Just to give you a more extreme example, back home where I'm from in rural North Yorkshire, mental health services are particularly badly staffed, which means that they're very reliant on locums, and locums are in high demand. A consultant psychiatrist for a locum shift back home can easily make £150–200 per hour for a non-resident on call. They don't even need to be there in the hospital, in the trust. They can be at home, just contactable via their mobile phone. There are some things to bear in mind, however. This is not an unlimited treasure trove, otherwise everybody would be doing it all the time. The first is that locum shifts are always done in addition to your regular contracted hours, not instead of. So coming back to the example of my junior doctor job, when I was working in surgery, I was employed for 48 hours a week. I was probably working 60 hours a week on average. There is absolutely no way that I would have had the time, energy, or inclination to do locum shifts on top of that workload. It just wouldn't have been worth it to me. The second thing to consider is that you still pay income tax, obviously, on these earnings. And actually, as a consequence of accelerating your earnings and raising them quite quickly over a short period of time, it's possible to poke up into the next tax bracket above where you usually sit. Now, obviously, if you suddenly go up a tax bracket, this could mean that you're suddenly paying back a lot of your newly found earnings in tax that you weren't expecting, and so you would have actually been better strategically earning slightly less to make sure that you were sitting at the top of your own tax bracket rather than going into the next one up and losing more in tax. And the third thing to mention now is that under the latest junior doctor contracts, you are actually obliged to offer your services to your own trust if there is a labour shortage first. That is to say, if my hospital is paying £40 per hour as a locum and they're short, even though the next hospital down the road, where I don't normally work, might be paying £80 an hour for the same role, if my trust is short, I have to work in my own trust before going and leaving to work somewhere else. That's stipulated in the new contracts. Thinking more broadly, the rates can actually vary a lot depending where in the country you're working as well. For example, I said I'm living in the northeast, where locum rates are known to be quite good and have a reputation for being quite high at all stages. A lot of this is simply driven by supply and demand. In London, for example, we have almost the opposite situation where there is a very high concentration of doctors, albeit for a very high concentration of the population. But there is a pan-London agreement in place which artificially suppresses and limits the amount that locum doctors can actually be paid. This is a mutual agreement between a lot of the NHS trusts in the area. Whether this is an example of sort of legalised price fixing or again, a consequence of supply and demand, that's for you to decide. So now thinking more practically about what people actually do in the real world, it's becoming more and more common to take time out of training specifically to locum and earn a lot of money in a short time frame. So that might mean finishing your Foundation 1 and Foundation 2 years, so you're 2 years after medical school, but then before embarking on specialty training, which is what will set you up to be a consultant long term, many people are taking 1, 2, 3 years out of training, working full-time or slightly less than full-time locuming, simply because you stand to make so much more money than you would if you were in a formalised training programme. It's a natural breaking point in the career. It makes absolute sense to do it at this point, because this is the time when people are maybe going to want to save up for a deposit on a house, start a family, work for 6 months and then travel for 6 months before embarking on 6, 8, 10 years of training. And indeed, thinking about the other end of things, once you've finished your training, either as a GP or a consultant in medicine or surgery, or indeed any other specialty you want to do, you can actually locum forever. As long as you maintain your validation and you're in good standing with the General Medical Council, there is no mandate that says you have to work for the NHS full time. Many people will simply locum 1, 2, 3 days a week, whatever it takes for them to lead the sort of life that they want to live, and use the rest of their time how they want. That is the situation that we exist in at the moment, and power to those people, I say, if that's what they want to do. There are, however, some trade-offs to this lifestyle at any stage of training where you're relying on locums. The first is that locums are unpredictable work by their nature. It's relatively uncommon to be able to land a permanent locum position. And the second thing is that if you're relying on locums, you are not subject to a lot of the same pay protections that permanent employees within the NHS would be. Things like statutory sick pay, annual leave, and income protection. To counteract this, however, there are lots and lots of companies that exist called locum agencies, which, as the name suggests, purely exist to connect doctors who want to do locum work with NHS trusts and employers that want locum doctors, and will do a lot of the negotiating as a middleman on the behalf of doctors in exchange for a cut. So while your earnings might be slightly less than negotiating for yourself, it can provide you with a lot more stability if that's what you want. Now, as a closing point to this video, just to think about the context in which this all takes place in the wider NHS, the NHS has a massive problem with over-reliancy on locum doctors. And in fact, there was a 2016 BMJ, British Medical Journal, investigation looking at spending on locums, which found that the NHS year on year spends 25 times as much money paying locum and agency doctors as much as it does on permanently employed doctors. Isn't that absolutely astronomical? And it's not surprising, is it, given that your locum doctor is going to be paid between 2 and 4 times the average salary of each of those permanent members of staff. And on top of that, 39% of all GPs who are fully qualified were estimated to be on purely locum contracts. That is, they're not employed by an NHS trust or by a GP practice. Meanwhile, in 2019, there were over 9,000 empty full-time medical posts in the NHS. And you can imagine that if a significant proportion of those are consultant posts that are empty, especially in niche specialties, that is going to be an incredibly expensive service to try and run using purely locum staff. Once again, in my humble opinion, this simply reflects a lack of foresight, a lack of planning, and a lack of priority, essentially, on the point of the government. When the conditions, the lifestyle and the pay are so much better for locum staff than they are for permanently employed NHS staff, remember that you're being paid to do the exact same role, it's just that one of you is earning 3 times as much. Is it really any surprise that many doctors choose to live this lifestyle? We have an ongoing problem with a lack of consultants in many specialties, but yet despite this, we're not training any more specialty doctors, we're increasing the number of medical school places, but not increasing the training places in the middle grades and in specialty training for them to actually train into specialty consultants. And in many cases, specialties are having their training places cut. And the consequences of this should be fairly simple. Our consultant shortage is going to get worse because we're not training anymore. The general working conditions for doctors of all grades is going to get worse as the NHS conditions themselves become worse as it runs out of money, and the difference between locum and agency staff and permanent staff is going to get wider and wider and wider. This is in turn going to increase reliance on locums as more and more people don't want to work in the NHS anymore, and more people are simply going to leave the NHS, either locum or go somewhere else. And I'll put it to you guys watching, with things going as they are, can you blame any of them? I don't think I can. So there we go guys, that is an explainer video on exactly what locuming is. Have you had any experiences locuming or working with locum staff? Do you see locum doctors regularly? Let me know in the comments. Take care and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.